What does it mean to be called by God? If you think about it, it's one of those really funny expressions which are kind of unique to the church. I mean, after all, if you were, I guess, out in the real world, away from church people, and you used the expression to somebody, hey, I've been called by God, somebody might look for a psychiatrist for you to see. Just saying. That guy over there, he said he heard God talking to him. You know, it's kind of funny when we talk about prayer, we can say prayer is okay, us talking to God, but if we hear the voice of God, then maybe you might need to go see a shrink. So it's kind of an interesting expression. But within the church, it's a phrase we use a lot. Not as often, I think, as we have in the past, but we still use it. And I've freely used that expression myself when talking about how I sense what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And I've freely admitted to you guys in the past, I've never heard the audible voice of God. There are times when I know that God has directed or called me to do something. Now, today is a special service, and it's going to be directed more when we're talking about pastoral ministry. But I want you to keep in mind that as we go through this isn't just talking about people who are called vocationally into the ministry. Because as Baptist-ish as this church is, you know, our thing is that every person, to some extent, is a minister and is called by God to spread the gospel and to serve within the church. So keep that in mind. But this service today is going to be tailored specifically towards when we talk about that thing of vocational ministry, of being a pastor. And that's kind of the most common way we use that expression when we say called by God, is somebody is called to be a pastor, someone is called into the ministry. You know, and part of this whole sermon, when I was developing it, and I was trying to think of what does it really mean when we use that word pastor? What is a pastor? Because ironically, even though I've kind of felt this call on my life for a long time, and even went through the ordination process, I still struggle to define what a pastor is supposed to do and what they're supposed to be. I mean, after all, until this church, the starting of this church kind of fell into my lap, and that's the way I use it. That's the expression I use. You know, somebody handed me keys to a building and said, here, start a church. And I said, that sounds like a good idea. That's literally what happened. I wish I could say I entered into a season of thoughtful prayer and discernment, and then there was this great guiding light that came out of the heaven along with keys to a building. And God said, now go forth and starteth a church. I don't know why God always speaks in the King James whenever He's talking like that, but He does. That's what I think of. And until I started this church, I never thought I would be a pastor in the traditional sense. Now, I had went through the ordination process probably about 5 years before this church started. But I really struggled with, am I going to really be a traditional pastor? And then all you guys started coming, and I realized it doesn't matter if we have a building. You guys are not traditional anyway. So I guess we're still good. But at the same time, I know that the role of a pastor is a special one. And in fact, we are almost at a crisis point in the church in America, with ministers leaving the vocation faster than they're being replaced. It begs the question, is God not calling people anymore? But when you strip away all of this stuff that we've attached to the phrase, what is a minister anyway? What is a pastor? How can we define it universally? And I really wrestled with trying to find the right verses and things. And so what happens whenever I get to a place on Friday, which is called the panic mode, when you haven't figured out kind of what God, you know you have a sermon, but you don't really know where to go with it. You use, for me, I go back to the lectionary. And I've been using the lectionary up till this week, but I'm like, no, this is a special service. I'm going to have to find the right verses for this service. Well, I got to the place where I couldn't. And so then I went back to the lectionary. And lo and behold, God works in mysterious ways. We're in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 30. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because He was teaching His disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill Him, and after 3 days He will rise. But they didn't understand what He meant. They were afraid to ask him about it. So they went on to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you guys arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Now, one of the things, and I've said this repeatedly, that I love about the Bibles is that the characters that are often found within these stories are so very human. One of the greatest ironies, I think, of modern Christianity is that we have taken this Bible, which is a very human book, and it has all of these it's full of these stories about all the ways that humans fail to get this relationship with God right, and we've kind of, reduced it down to some sort of dull, mechanical set of instructions. I mean, let's face it, who reads instructions anyway? But stories. Stories have a way of getting to us. And this, to me, is one of those great stories. So here, Jesus, he's kind of looking at his ministry. And he knows that he needs to spend some special time with these disciples. The end is coming. And so he needs this time away with his chosen kind of leadership team. And he has all kinds of social pressures right now from the crowds of people who have been following him. He's been healing and teaching, and all of these people want a piece of Jesus. But Jesus knows, I need to spend some time with these guys. He knows the mission is about to change. So he needs to get away with his disciples. He needs to give them some mentoring. Now, along the way, Jesus really opens up. It's a very personal kind of opening up. Because he says to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. And he's going to suffer, and he's going to die. And in 3 days, he's going to rise again. Now, I imagine there's probably more to this story than that. I mean, they're walking a long ways. And so he's telling, that's kind of maybe the synopsis of it. But he's kind of pouring his heart out to these selected followers. He's giving them this mentoring. Now, of course, what happens when somebody oftentimes opens their heart and soul up to you? Well, it gets a little uncomfortable. Picture the disciples kind of looking around going, "Whoa, this is some heavy stuff. I don't know what to do with this." And then along the way, it's a long journey. Along the way, while Jesus is teaching, something happens in the back. And maybe Jesus is walking in front and he's expounding all of these great things like a good teacher. And they're like a bunch of kindergartners behind him. I picture that sometimes. It's helpful to kind of picture the disciples that way. Because I think a lot of times we're that way. So they're trying to listen, they're trying to pay attention. Then all of a sudden a discussion breaks out about, okay, who does Jesus like better? Who's the favorite? Who's going to be the greatest? That's kind of how the discussion is going. It is. It's like a teacher with a classroom full of kindergartners. And that's what this whole discussion degenerates into is, well, which one of us, when this kingdom fully comes, because that's what they heard. They just kind of heard, they may have skipped over the whole death and suffering part, but they realize this whole resurrection thing and the kingdom's going to come. Well, which one of us is going to be the best? Who's going to have the best seat at the table? Who gets to sit by Jesus? If you have kids and you have kids with siblings and where they have to sit, it's very important. And you have to work out the fairness of it or you're in big trouble. Who gets to sit by who? That's how it goes down. And so here you have these disciples, these followers of Jesus. At the end of the day, that's their argument. All they've heard is, oh yes, resurrection, kingdom coming. Now, who gets to be the most important? Because that's the really important thing about this discussion. What is the order? Where is the pecking order? And I think this is kind of ingrained in our DNA. If you go to any school playground around the world at recess time, you will see kids picking sports teams. And there are always kids who consistently get picked last. That, by the way, was me. Just putting that out there. See, in sports, we value the fastest, the strongest, the most coordinated. None of those things apply to me. But we also do it in other things. In film and entertainment, we value the best looking. I've always found it funny whenever you watch like historical dramas and they pick these really beautiful people to play these historical figures, and then you go back and you look at the pictures of them and you're like, that is not how Queen Victoria looked. She was a bit more homely than what they show on the Victoria if you watch PBS, me and British TV. I'm like, Victoria did not look like that. But that's what we value because that's what you got to sell the film. So the film, we value the best looking. In academics, we want the smartest. Those are the ones who are honored in every field of the world. The best of the best. So it is only natural that the disciples want to know who really is the best and the best in God's kingdom. Now, picture Jesus when he gets to the house. And of course it is. It's like a parent addressing children. So, who broke the lamp? So, what were you guys fighting about in the back seat of the car? And I picture the disciples go, oh no. We thought that was a private conversation. It's amazing how kids think that the stuff that they do is private and they can get away with stuff, and then they're like shocked when you find out about it. And I picture that look on their faces. And then I also picture Jesus kind of slapping his forehead and maybe shaking his head, maybe pinching the bridge of his nose, because this is not a new discussion. He's like, no. Are you still so slow? Are you still so dull? We've been together for 3 years, and still to this day, it's like one big exercise in missing the point. The ministry we have isn't some act to gain favor, so that I can still go and fulfill all of you guys' messianic dreams. This is the way to God, and if you want to get to God, then the only way to God is to become last. The one who is the greatest is the servant of all. And that phrase hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it on Friday. It is like I said before, I didn't choose this reading today. It's the assigned gospel reading for this date in the lectionary. You can Google it and look it up. This is remarkable when you consider that last weekend we chose the date to license a new minister. And I did struggle this week with what to preach. And then I came across that phrase. And I think I couldn't create a better definition for a pastor if I wrote it myself, which I didn't. Servant of all. Because the thing is that within a church, I emphasize this a lot, that our role in church is to be servants. And so the person up front, a lot of times in churches we kind of picture it more as a leadership structure where the guy up front knows what he's talking about, is in charge. Y'all can laugh at that. I mean, y'all know me. But here's the deal. If someone is called vocationally into the ministry, then it's not necessarily an ascent. You're not going up to anything. It's actually a descent. Because in order for you to lead the church and to be a part of and to be the person out front, you have to be the person that serves everybody. Not just the people within your church, but the people without. And I love that definition because oftentimes we picture the pastor as the answer giver, as the one who knows everything. But here's the deal, and y'all have been with me long enough to know we don't. Heck, on Wednesday nights when we have the discussion, y'all have a lot better insights than I do sometimes. Whenever I do the study, there are things I don't know. I put a question mark and I was like, I hope somebody says something interesting because I don't have a clue. And if that's the definition, then you'll be disappointed by pastors all the time. And I think pastors put that pressure on themselves. But if the pastor is the servant of all, then you don't always have to have the answer. Because I don't. And we always don't. I don't have to have the answer, but I have to be present. And I think that that's a beautiful thing to say of the pastors. The pastor, and you can even tell that, my pastor, half the stuff he says in church on Sunday I disagree with. But you know what? When I need him, he shows up. He's there. He's holding my hand. He doesn't always say the right thing, because Lord knows I stick my foot in my mouth more than anybody else around. But I know that when it comes down to it at the end of the day, if I call him, then he's going to be there for me. And that's all a pastor is the one who serves the most, who leads the way for everybody else to serve. who models that kind of thing. That's what a pastor is. I think one of the reasons we have a shortage of pastors in the United States is because we've created this nice, neat little box that pastors and ministers are supposed to fit into. We set limits and boundaries around the job of pastor or minister or whatever you want to call it, that it's no wonder we have trouble finding people who meet these guidelines. Now, oftentimes, we limit on how God speaks. And I've made it clear to you that I have never once in my life heard the audible voice of God. I've never had a clear message from on high about what I'm supposed to do with my ministry. And everything that I am right now, and while I'm sitting here with you, is simply stepping through opening doors and praying like crazy that I'm doing the right thing. I've often described my ministry as stumbling towards God. Yet some would say, because I haven't heard a voice, that should disqualify me from preaching. Marcus, you should always be 100% sure of your call. But I would answer that, if I was 100% sure of everything I did, then where is faith? How can grace work if I'm always sure I'm making the right decision? We limit to whom God speaks. This one burns me up more than anything else. I've kind of been a part of the church, I guess, system for the last, 12 or 13 years, maybe longer than that. My perception of time has been skewed. But I've been around the block a while. And I've watched perfectly good candidates for the ministry get ground up in the wheel of church bureaucracy and rules. And if there's one thing that reading the Bible teaches us, is that the moment that we start creating limits on who God calls, well, He's going to call a person from that group. And then looks at the church universal and goes, I think God does that a lot. You said He couldn't, so I'm going to call that person. So you know just exactly how big of a God I am. We limit the role of pastor. Now what's funny is we've created in the current church world, we've created all these lovely little pastoral titles. Preaching pastor, teaching pastor, executive pastor, youth pastor, children's pastor. I'm assuming there'll be a pastor of cleaning the toilets. I don't know. So put that in there. I don't know. There you go. Michael raised his hand. But we put all these lovely little things with their own in-depth job description. But what if someone's called to something different? What if they're called to a deeper level of service, but they don't fit into one of those categories? Then what? See, for me, that's why this definition works so well. Because all I'm saying is, look, this person is the servant of all. It's time for us to expand this role of pastor outside the walls of the church. We need people who are called to be pastors among those who would never darken the door of a church. Shepherding people in the workplace, in school, in the world around them. Called and set apart by God to be servants out there. Somebody wants to go get the kids. It's time to go ahead and go bring kids in. See, I want to tell you today, church, that I am excited because today's service marks an exciting first for us as a church. See, we have one among us who feels that God is calling them into a life of dedicated service to God. And I always term that word vocational ministry, meaning that God has called them to a life of service to the church, no matter what they have to do to earn a living. Now here's the thing. In the spirit of this bunch of misfits and vagabonds, the first person we have seeking ordination is not what you would call a typical candidate for the ministry. Nor does she feel at this time that she's called to be a typical pastor of a church. But she still feels the need to pursue this life of vocational ministry. Now, it would be easier to list all the ways why she can't be an ordained minister. But my job and your job is never to stand in the way of anyone who demonstrates a clear call and a willingness to serve the church. So I'm going to kind of tell you guys what's going on here. Michaela, you can come on up for a second. I'm going to wait for I got to stall a little for the kids to get in here. In our kind of Baptist-ish tradition, we don't ordain a candidate right away. We feel like that there should be a time of seeking and of searching and of prayer, and it's not necessarily to kind of create a space where we try to pick them apart and find all the ways that they can't be a minister. So there you go. What we want to do is we want to create a space where we affirm their call, and we also give them time to complete more training. And come on in, guys, and just kind of filter wherever you want to sit for a second. Come on in. So what we want to do is, rather than, like I said, when people are called into the ministry, we don't like to just lay hands on them, ordain them right there. But we do want to create a time and a space where they can kind of work out their call. They could be mentored. They can get some additional training if they haven't been to seminary. It usually takes about a year process. We call it licensing. You call it anything you want. But what it does is it affirms their commitment to the process of ordination, the mentor's commitment to helping them through the process, and the church's commitment to be there for them as they seek out this call. And so today, we are going to participate, and a lot of times when we do licensing, it's just usually some little thing, and we give them a certificate, and you don't know about it. But I always like to mark things, and this is a significant, I think, step in the life of this church and the life of McKaylee. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to participate in a licensing kind of ceremony for her. And this will mark the beginning of her kind of transitioning towards that ordination. She and I have already sat down a few times and have started working on a kind of a path of study. You're going to see a lot more of her. She's going to be preaching some sermons here on Sundays throughout the next year, and kind of in preparation for that. But today what I want to do is I want us to affirm that call on her life, and for us to kind of celebrate this really amazing time in the life of a small church. I mean, it's not often that you get to, as a pastor, that you get to participate in something so amazing. And so right now, brothers and sisters in Christ, I present to you McKaylee to be licensed as a minister of the gospel. Myself and some of the other leaders of the church have inquired diligently concerning her, and we have found her to be fit for this sacred vocation. McKaylee, do you believe you are moved by the Holy Spirit to serve as a minister of the gospel? Will you strive to live a life in keeping with what you preach? Take care that you perform these duties faithfully as much as you are able, the Lord being your helper. Now, as your chosen mentor, I promise to be the best guide I can be on this journey. I promise to teach you all that I can about how to be a faithful minister of the gospel. I promise to always listen should you have questions along the way. I cannot always promise answers, but I can promise that I will always listen to you as you seek the will of the Father. Church, if the church does indeed choose to support her, then this is where we're going to all participate together. McKaylee, I want you to probably be better to stand right here. And this is what I want us to do, to end. We're going to gather around her and we're going to it's called laying on of hands. And I know that as a church of introverts and Baptist people, y'all are kind of opposed to that. So you're going to get you out your comfort zone. This is how this is going to work. Because there are times when it's necessary. And so we're going to gather up here and you're all going to filter around and grab a hymn, I don't have a lot of hymn books, but kind of space them out because we're going to sing after we get done too. But I want you to kind of filter up here. Some will lay hands directly on McKaylee. If you can't lay hands on her, then you lay hands on the person kind of behind them. You know, we're going to kind of form this kind of mobbish circle. And then there will be some words up on the screen that I'm going to lead you guys in saying. And that's going to be your promise to her as your church. Because here's the deal. I can support her all day long, but you guys also have to encourage her as well. And so this is kind of your opportunity to do that. And then I'll say a prayer, and then we're going to end in a song. So at this time, if you would all kind of gather up here. And like I said, lay hands on her if you can. If not, the person next to you, kind of behind, kind of filter up here in a beautiful mob. I love beautiful mobs. Kind of get where you can see the screen. All right. I'll start. We, the church, promise to help you, McKaylee, explore the call that God has given you. We promise to continuously pray for you as you seek out your vocation. We promise to support you with both our wisdom and friendship. We promise to encourage you, knowing that this ministry can be difficult. We promise to be faithful companions on this journey. McKaylee, you have affirmed your intent to pursue ordination as a minister in the Church of Jesus Christ. Your chosen mentor pastor has affirmed his willingness to be your guide on this journey, and your church has promised you their prayers and support as well. We will now conclude this service with a prayer of dedication. Father God, I am thankful that you still call people into your service. We lift up McKaylee to you now as she embarks on this new part of her faith journey. Be with me as her mentor as I prove to be a worthy guide on this path. Be with us collectively as her church. May we provide a safe and engaging place to work out her call. Amen.